Right, good evening everybody, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your evening to join us for this webinar being hosted by AHDB Beef and Lamb. My name is Katie Thorley and I'm the Knowledge Transfer Manager for Beef and Lamb within AHDB. I'm delighted to bring you tonight's webinar on feeding dry cows to boost colostrum and fertility. Our presenter this evening is Debbie Brown, who is a trained vet but currently works as Technical Development Manager at Dugdale Nutrition. The plan of action this evening is Debbie will take you through a presentation and then there'll be time for questions and comments at the end. You will all stay muted throughout the webinar, so if anyone has got a question, if you type it in the box on the right hand side of your screen, I will ask those questions to Debbie at the end. There shouldn't be any technical difficulties, but if there is, then please bear with us. And so without further delay, I'll hand you over to Debbie for tonight's webinar.
Thanks, Katie, and good evening, everybody. As Katie said, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, or I'm going to talk about dry cow, suckler cow diets and their impact on calf colostrum and fertility. And my screen's just frozen, sorry. Okay, so what I'm aiming to cover is why. Why are you listening? What are we worried about? And why do we need to think about this time through the year with our suckler cows? What are the aims of a successful calving period? I'm going to look a little bit at body condition scoring and explain the reason why that is so important. I'm going to look at forages and diets and where we need to consider those when we're looking at what we're doing with these animals. We'll then see what the impact of all these things has on fertility and colostrum. And finally, I'll just give a little bit of a hint on minerals, but that's not something I'm going to go into a lot of detail. Okay, so why? Why do we even think about how we feed our suckler cows for calving, for colostrum and for fertility? Well, there's been a study done last year by Edinburgh University, and the results from that did not give good reading. There were blood samples taken from across 50 suckler herds. 1 in 3 of those did not have enough energy. So 1 in 3 suckler cows out of those herds did not have enough energy pre-calving. And 2 in 3 of those suckler cows did not have enough rumen protein pre-calving. And you might question, well, what does that matter? Well, that has a big impact on the maternal transfer and the colostrum quality and milk production for the future calf. It also will affect fertility. And both of these things are absolutely key to what happens in future years from a suckler herd perspective. We always hear the saying that fertility is key to success. Well, at the end of the day, we're all trying to make a profitable enterprise. And the profitability of suckler production depends on every cow producing a calf every year. And nutrition plays a key role in achieving this. So what are some targets that we can actually look at and some measurements that we can make to see how our system is actually working? And these are the key KPIs that came out of a project AHDB did a couple of years ago. And when we're looking at suckler systems, we need to think about what is the percentage of our cows calving in the first 6 weeks of our calving period. I'll come back to that when it comes to nutrition, but really the key is the tighter that calving period is, the easier the animals are to manage, and the easier it is to manage the calves afterwards. What about heifers? I'm not really covering heifers tonight, but what age do they calve at, and are they efficient, and are they big enough, and do they do a good job? How many of you weigh, and what is the weaning weight of your calves? And are the cows producing enough milk to rear those calves well and giving them a best start in life so they do well through to weaning and give them a good opportunity to perform as well as you want them to? And then what is that costing you? And this is something that a lot of people don't really look at. But bear in mind that certainly from the first 2 KPIs on that list, a lot of that information can come just from your BCMS records. Okay, so we'll move on to some of the more practical aspects of it. And body condition scoring is something we talk about a lot, and some farmers do it regularly. But do enough people do it, and is it something we could make more of? It's really important to know what the body condition score of your cows is, because that does affect calving ease, subsequent fertility, and calf performance. Ideally, 1 month pre-calving, they'll have the target of between 2.5 to 3 out of a score of 5. The thing to remember with body condition scoring is it's easy to do. You can do it yourself on your farm, and as long as the same person is doing it regularly, you get a good impression of what's happening with your cow's condition. But if you do need to make changes, remember they need to be made gradually. It's a really important management tool. And you see from the picture, you've got to get hands-on. Have a look at various points on the cow, over the ribs, over the spinous processes, around the tail head, and assess 2 or 3 different points, but actually get hands-on to see what that condition is. To change a body condition score equates to about 13% of live weight, so it's no mean feat. But it means if we know what condition our cows are in, we can group them by that score and feed them appropriately. We can preferentially feed or graze first calving heifers and thin cows to give them a help to get to the target body condition score. But the really, really important that in the last third of pregnancy, we do not make any major diet changes. Cows tend to gain condition cheaply at grass and then lose it during the winter. And that's a good way of being able to feed efficiently, but we need to do it gradually and in a way that we're not impacting on future calf performance and milk production. If we've got cows that are very fat at calving, they tend to have more calving difficulties. They lay more fat down internally. Their hormone system doesn't work as well to get them to get on with calving, but the pure laying down of that fat will have an impact in how well those cows actually can expand to get the calf out. Vice versa, the very thin cows can have other issues. They too can have calving difficulties because they might not have the energy to get on and push the calf out. They're more likely to have poorer quality colostrum, and therefore the calf's less likely to get a good supply of antibodies, which will have an impact on that calf health. It'll also affect return to estrus and lead to lower conception rates, which obviously has a negative on performance for future years. This was some work done in 2006, and it just shows the effect of body condition score at calving on the calving interval in suckler cows. Now, bearing in mind, in an ideal situation, our cows are going to calve once every year. We need them to have that calving interval of 364 days. If it's any higher than that, then we're losing time. This data actually comes from dairy, but again, it's just another way of looking at it, in that after calving, if our cows are losing condition, they do not ovulate as well. So if they're losing condition after calving, they won't ovulate, so they then don't come into heat season, they won't get bulled, and then they don't get in calf, and that's going to extend that calving interval. Okay, so what can we do actually as far as actually feeding these animals to get to that target body condition score? And what can we consider as far as being able to feed these animals well to get good milk and colostrum production and help fertility? Historically, we've always fed suckler cows the poorest forage on the farm. A lot of the time when those cows come in from grass at the back end and they're in, if they're spring calving particularly, and they're in good condition, now's the time to sort of save a bit of money, and we put in a straw-based or a low-quality forage to try and, cheapen the ration, but it's a good way of using some of that forage up. In autumn calving herds, we need to be feeding them well to get them back into calf through the winter when we haven't got grass available. The problem is that we forget that as we get close to calving, we have to step up because we're trying to achieve good milk production and colostrum. And we've got to get these animals ready for getting back, ovulating back into calf again when we put the bull back out. So there are opportunities for feeding poor quality forages, and the best time for this is post-weaning. The cow at that stage has a low nutrient demand. That's the stage where if we need to reduce some body fat cover, we can get away with doing it. And it helps us reduce some of those feed costs. But remember, this has to be done gradually. However, in the last 4 to 6 weeks pre-calving, the cow's needs increase. She's got increased calf demands and she's got to prepare herself for colostrum and milk production. So we've got to increase the supply of nutrients at this time. That will not have an impact on calf size. The majority of calf size is determined earlier on in that mid-pregnancy. So when we get to the last 4 to 6 weeks, if we restrict her at this time, the only thing we're going to do is have a negative on colostrum and milk production, and therefore the future calf growth. As much as the calf is growing in that period, a lot of that nutrient is being partitioned into that colostrum and milk production. So the calf size is not determined in that last 4 to 6 weeks. Another thing just to consider though, if we are going to look at that poor quality forages for our suckler cows at certain times, be aware we need to be careful if we're feeding any mouldy forages. Ideally avoid this altogether because it increases the risk of abortion. This is just a forage analysis just to give an indication of what we can be looking at when you get your forage analysed. And it's worth getting your forage analysed, even if it's bales. I know it's variable and bales will vary right through different fields, different cuts. But if you've got an idea of what some of those different fields are analysing like, and also what some of those different cuts are analysing like, you can target different forages for different times. So if you do have some poorer forage, you know you can use it straight post-weaning. But then if you've got better quality forages, which is higher protein and higher ME, then you can use that and reduce the need for supplementary feeding. The key things to look at on the forage analysis, as far as suckler cows are concerned, the dry matter, because you want to know how much of that they're actually going to eat. And you can work that out by working out the dry matter that your cows are going to actually eat and then work that back into fresh weight. You can look at the protein percentage. So that tells you how much protein they're going to get from that forage. And you can work through how much they might need. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Also, energy requirements. What are the energy requirements to your cow and how much are they going to get from the forage that you're feeding? Some of the other things will help towards palatability, but they're the key factors as far as working out on farm how much you need to feed. So this gives you some idea of the demands. So a dry cow, 700 kilo dry cow, post-weaning, before she gets close to calving, she's going to eat somewhere between 9.5 and 11 kilos of dry matter. And a lot of that will depend on the quality of that forage. So if you were feeding a lot of straw, her dry matter intake will be lower than if she's on silage. But she only needs about 75 megajoules of energy per day. So at weaning, she really doesn't need much energy at all. And her crude protein requirement is only about 9% of dry matter. An in-calf heifer is still trying to grow. So she does have a slightly higher demand, as you can see from the table. So during the dry period, when we're feeding these animals, we need to satisfy the cow's appetite. This gets her really going, ready for when she calves down, and she's then going to fill herself up to produce as much milk as possible. We need to target trace elements and minerals. So we need to make sure we're giving them the requirement that they need. And if there are any deficiencies, we can meet those. We've got to manage the cows to reach the target for body condition score for calving. That 2.5 to 3 is key. But remember, we've got to start that right at weaning, otherwise it's too late. We need to ration the cow according to her live weight. And whatever live weight change she needs up to 8 weeks before calving. Once you get to that last 8 weeks, it's too late. And if an accurate calving date is unknown, then it is possible to feed these cows a flat rate regime, but we've got to bear in mind that what we're trying to achieve, and we need to still think about how we're going to manage them as we get close to calving to really drive that colostrum production. Do not reduce feed during that last month of pregnancy. So these are some different options or some different diets that could well be used out there. A silage diet usually will have too much energy, certainly straight after weaning. So at that time, you're going to restrict it so that you know that they're just getting the energy they require. On a lot of suckler farms, it's very, very difficult to feed them to appetite and not overdo energy. So not to have an excess of energy laying fat down. Even with a straw-based diet, they need a lot of straw to get there on most farms. However, it does depend on what quality of other forages you've got available. If you're feeding a diet which has got straw, quite a lot of straw in it, and some silage, when you get closer to calving, you may need to top that up with some energy and rape or a protein source of some sort. And again, with hay on its own or straw on its own, we're going to need to feed some extra protein source and energy source. But again, it comes back to what's available. Straw's the key, because if you look at line 2 on this table, where they've got full straw diet, then that's going to be really low in protein. And if we don't help that as we get close to calving, we're going to have an impact on colostrum. So straw-based diets are low in energy and protein. We've got to get that protein supply. We've got to get the bacteria in the rumen that does the digestion to at least 9% crude protein dry matter to ensure that they digest that straw and produce the microbial protein they need to produce milk. On a straw-based diet, they all need to have good access to the feed that's being fed as well as the straw, and the straw needs to be clean and dry. And they will need minerals along with the straw diet because it's low in minerals as well. And as you get close to calving, it is definitely worth considering adding silage into there. There's a fair chance, even from earlier in the dry period, you'll want some silage in there just to help with some rumen function. But it depends what you've got available on farm, and you've got to work with what you've got. What about diet restriction? So like with silage, if you're restricting diets, how do we manage that? Well, post-weaning, it can be useful. So some farms don't have a lot of availability to straw and have to feed silage that they've got available or hay. And if it's too much energy, then feeding them to a quantity is worth looking at sometimes. It does depend on body condition score. So you need to know that your cows have got condition to carry them through, and they may well be fit enough that they need to lose a little bit. If there's any thinner animals, then you're going to allow them a little bit more leeway and a little bit more energy to help that body condition score. It also depends on the age of the cattle. So again, older cattle are likely to cope with this more than young heifers are. And with diet restriction, it can just be restricting the amount you feed, or it could be with those high straw diets and a little bit of silage. It will depend on forage availability and quality. And this year, where forage availability has been tight, more farmers have been looking at restricting diets to try and reduce the amount they need and save some until you get closer to calving. In that situation, you really need to know what the quality is so you can save the better forages and make sure you have enough for that last 4 to 6 weeks. Whatever you do, do not restrict it in the last month of pregnancy, because that will lead to more calving difficulties, and it will reduce the quality and quantity of colostrum that's available to the calf. And a lot of farmers will then say, well, actually, if I feed to optimum and keep feeding in that last 4 to 6 weeks, I get big calves. Actually, it's a bit of a fallacy. If you want to avoid big calves, then the key is review the bull that's being used. Nowadays, a lot of more bulls have figures available that you can use to see where their calving ease is. Select your heifers carefully. How big are they? Are they big enough to bull? Are they big enough to calve down? And how do I manage them so that they really are ready to calve? And as I've already said, use that mid-pregnancy period rather than the last bit of pregnancy before calving to change condition score and restrict them. So then when the calf is born, we've got to try and get that colostrum into them. The colostrum contains the antibodies which provide the calf with the immunity and the nutrients which it requires to get the best start and give it a chance to keep growing well right through to weaning. Remember the 3 Qs of colostrum. Quantity. They need a minimum of 3 litres in the first 2 hours after birth as soon as possible, and that equates to approximately 20 minutes of vigorous suckling. So do you know that your calves are getting up and getting on that cow's teat within the first couple of hours of calving, and being able to then suckle vigorously enough to take enough colostrum? Is the colostrum available for them? Has the cow got enough for them to get that? What about the quality? It's not easy to get a colostrum sample off suckler cows to sample that colostrum quality, but if you can, then it's worth doing to check what the level is of the antibodies in that colostrum. If you can't do that, then it's worth testing the calf. You can take blood samples from the calf and test them to see whether they've got enough maternal antibody transfer. And a lot of the calves in the study didn't get the maternal transfer that they should have had due to the lack of protein and energy pre-calving in the cows. And it needs to be in there really quickly. So within 2 hours of birth, to really give them the benefit that they need and getting the absorption through the gut satisfactorily before that gut starts to shut down to those antibodies. So how do we influence colostrum quality? Well, it's influenced by various factors, including cow nutrition and age. There's been various funded work done, but AHDB Beef and Lamb did some funded work looking at the effects of protein on colostrum quality. It's estimated that 1 kilogram of colostrum is produced per day in the last 2 weeks of gestation. And we don't think about that a lot of the time when we're formulating rations. But this is why not restricting feed and building up a little bit before calving with protein and energy is required to make sure we get the best start for these calves. And research suggests that protein can affect the calf's ability to absorb antibodies out of the colostrum. So if the cow's got enough protein that makes that colostrum more digestible, makes it more available, the calf will absorb it better. It gets a better vitality and a better start in life. So if you look at cow age, then again, that has an impact. And this table compares cows fed grass silage against cows fed straw, and then against heifers fed silage. And if we take out the straw diet for now and just look at cows fed grass silage versus heifers fed silage, then there's a 2 litre difference in colostrum yield. But there's also about a 15 milligram concentration of antibody difference between cows and heifers. So cows do tend to have better colostrum and more of it. If they're fed straw, that does have a negative impact, as you can see from the table. But even so, the heifers still came out worse in the study. So as a recap, colostrum provides the essential antibodies for the calf. When the calf's born, it doesn't have these antibodies itself. It doesn't have a fully functioning immune system. It depends on that colostrum to get the antibodies to be able to move forward and build its immune system to be able to keep healthy. So it's crucial to that calf's immune system status in the first few weeks of life. It's therefore essential to protect it from disease, reduce the risk of scour and pneumonia. And then the study done with in Ireland, there was a study where they looked at straw and minerals versus grass silage in the last 2 weeks. And those on straw did have less colostrum and there was lower antibodies in the calves. So it just feeds back to some of the other things we've already looked at. And this graph just shows, again, that colostrum yield against feeding and against cow age. So what about fertility? Once a cow calves, her energy requirements are approximately double of when she's a dry cow. So the aim is to avoid condition loss and ration changes between calving and 6 weeks after the service period. And in an ideal situation, if we're spring calving, you get a lovely spring, really good spring grass out there, and it's really easy to meet these requirements. If that doesn't happen, then we've got to try and support it. They'll help themselves a little bit, because if we look at the dry matter intakes, in early lactation, you can see that they'll eat somewhere up to 4 kilos of dry matter more than when they're dry. So they're going to get naturally more energy if they eat more. But we need to really have that feed available to keep that milk production and keep that energy requirement and help them with that body condition score, maintain it. Once they're producing milk, they also have a higher protein requirement. And we need to think about that as we get closer to calving, because really the early lactation figures is where we need to be in that last 2 to 4 weeks pre-calving as well. Okay, so just to finish really, minerals. We have to think about minerals, although I'm not, as I said, I'm not going into details really, but minerals are essential in the pre-calving period. In particular, we need to think about magnesium. The cow tends to have an excess of calcium available during the dry period, but when she comes to calve down, she needs a lot more calcium. Her hormonal system's not ready until she calves and then starts producing milk, and then she drives her hormone to try and get that calcium production ready. If we feed more magnesium in the dry period, close to calving, then that will help take away some of that calcium, so it balances her and drives her to start producing calcium a bit sooner. So we need to think about what magnesium supply, what's the balance of magnesium to calcium in our cows before calving. Selenium, vitamin E and iodine all have an effect on calf vitality, on the health status and the immune status of the animals, and also on future fertility. And so we need to make sure that if we've got any deficiencies, we meet the requirements. If we haven't got deficiencies, then we don't need to oversupplement, but we need to make sure we match the requirement of the animal. And it's worth looking into this in more detail. So the key messages from what we've talked about. Remember, straw-based diets can result in an undersupply of protein. This can be the situation even at weaning. And we need to bear that in mind, because cows can then end up bunged up if we've only got straw in there. And we need to give them some protein to help them actually utilise that straw and break it down. But certainly as we get closer to calving, we have to top that up. We have to supplement with silage or some sort of protein and energy supplement to make sure we get milk and colostrum production. Analyse your forage. Then you know whether you're going to need to supplement, or you'll know which your better forages are, and you can target them for the right timing as you get closer to calving, and to the right animals if you've got leaner animals or younger animals. Use your body condition score as a management tool so that you can separate out the animals that need a little bit more protein or energy, or you can cut back on some of those that need to lose a bit of condition. But remember, if you're going to do that, do it at the least crucial time, so at weaning, not in the last 6 weeks pre-calving. And remember what you're aiming for. Why are you worried about it? Why are you doing this work, worrying about trying to feed your cows right? Why do you want to try and improve maybe on what you're doing now? You've got to prepare the cow for calving. She has to be ready to calve down easily, so that the calf is not stressed and the cow's not stressed. We've got to aim for quality and quantity of colostrum so that the calf gets the best start in life. You're thinking about the next calf. So the calf this cow's going to have, it gets a good start, it grows well to weaning, it's easier to manage, and you've got a better end product. And you need to target the next bulling season. You need this cow to get back in calf in time so that she's going to calve down again within 365 days. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Debbie. While I just wait for some questions to come in this evening, I'd just like to remind everybody that it has been recorded. So if anybody does need to go back and recap anything, you will get a link to it over the next week or so. And also there are some manuals which you might want to refer to for a bit more information. There's Manual 5, which is feeding suckler cows and calves for better returns, and also Manual 8, which is optimizing suckler herd fertility for better returns. Right, the first question, Debbie. When during the year should people be actually body condition scoring?
Okay, so the key times really are weaning and calving and then pre-service. So they'd be the minimum amount of times that you would do it.
Okay, thank you. So this next question, I've only got straw available during the last 4 to 6 weeks, no silage at all. What type and how much concentrate do I need to include?
Okay, it really depends a little bit on the body condition score of your animals, but the key really is making sure that the protein balance is there. So you're going to need to feed enough rumen protein to get an overall diet up to that 11% of crude protein. And straw's around about 6%. And you're going to need energy to make sure you've got enough energy in there as well. You're probably looking somewhere around about 2 to 3 kilos of feed. Again, it's the rumen protein that's important, possibly with a little bit of bypass protein in to drive milk production and milk and colostrum quality as well.
Okay, thank you. If cows are housed together, pre-calving and post-calving, what's the best way to feed them as a group? Or would you probably advise they need to be separated out, really, to get the right nutrition into those different groups?
Yeah, in an ideal situation, they would be separated. I know it's not practical for everybody. The biggest issue really is that balance of magnesium and calcium, because the cow post-calving is going to need lots of calcium to keep milk production and support that calf's growth, whereas pre-calving, she doesn't need that. As far as other feed wise, to be fair, as long as they're close to calving and then post-calving, actual energy and protein requirements aren't that different, and so they'd be all right as a group. It's just managing from a milk fever perspective, if needed.
Okay, and when restricting forage, you mentioned during the presentation about restricting forage, what's the minimum feed space that you need to actually provide for dry cows, especially when you've got some that in the group that are a bit more shy?
Yeah, you need to ensure that every animal can get to feed at the same time. So you need, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what space it is, but you need to make sure every animal can comfortably get to feed at the same time if you're restricting anything.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain more about the idea of rumen protein?
Yeah, so protein sources are used in different ways. So some protein, when we feed, whether it be forage or whether it be concentrate, if it's got a protein source in there, then that protein will either be utilized by the bacteria in the stomach, in the rumen, and that will be broken down by the bacteria, and that's what we call rumen protein. And that is needed, the bacteria in there need rumen protein and energy to be able to grow, which that means that they will then break down the forage better and break down the feed that's available and make it into a format that the animal can use. Some protein does not get utilised in the rumen and will go through the rumen and be absorbed in the intestine or passed out in the feces. And that's usually known as digestible undegradable protein or undegradable protein. So that's the difference.
Okay, thank you. The next question, you haven't really said much about the levels of feeding, whether of protein or energy, for autumn calving cows to keep milk production going well, and how to get them back into calf within a tight window.
Okay, so as far as sort of pre-calving, the same principles apply. You're looking for a protein level of about 11% protein, and energy requirement up around about 130 megajoules as you get really close to calving. And then post-calving, the same, that sort of level is what's required. So in autumn calving herds, it's quite difficult to achieve that unless you've got good quality forage. So you need good quality forage for those animals post-calving. They'll need at least 11% crude protein and about 100, depends on the cow size from an energy perspective, but around about 130 megajoules for a cow sort of about 700 kilos. The difficulty is in autumn calving herds, cows tend to be in annies just a little bit longer than they do in spring. And the one way to try and help them get through that or help them to come bulling sooner might be to feed some supplementary energy, so some starch, which will drive the hormonal system a little bit better, or just to try and lift the energy that's available to those animals by supplementing if necessary. The problem is that if you just feed to try and supplement the animal, it'll partition it in different ways. So she'll initially partition it into milk, so she might produce more milk and still not come bulling very easily, but that will be contained a little bit by what the calf takes. So she has to balance herself for calf milk production, and then she'll start putting it into fertility.
Okay, thank you. And what sort of calving period should you be trying to aim for?
In an ideal situation, you probably want no more than really 9 to 12 week calving period. The tighter you can get it, the easier it is to manage your cows, because you can feed them for pre-calving, so you set them up together and you're not overfeeding ones that aren't going to calve for another 2 months. And also when the calf's born, it's easier to sort of manage them as they get closer to weaning. They're all similar age, they're hopefully more of a batch and they're easier to wean together. If you've got a more spread out calving period, then it may be worth targeting them in 2 or 3 blocks just to help management around feeding. I know that's one of the biggest issues on one of the farms I've worked with, where it was involved in actually the study that Edinburgh University did, where it's all year round calving. And one of the reasons why they were low for protein and energy was because it was really difficult to step up the cows that were coming close to calving, because they couldn't be separated out. They were too spread out from a calving period, and if we stepped them up too soon, some of them were a long way off calving and were getting too much protein mid-pregnancy, which then led to calving difficulties because calves were too big. So and they put on more condition and ended up too fat. So it was a real compounding issue. And so if we can tighten that calving period up to sort of a 9-week period, maximum 12 weeks really, but 9-week period ideally, you can manage that because you're not going to have a negative impact on body condition in that last period calving.
Okay, and what should they do with the cows that fall out of that calving period?
If you look at the economics behind it, and you've got enough replacements coming through, then they probably want to be culled or sold to somebody who they're fit to. In herds that are struggling for replacements or have another period of calving, then in some cases you can argue that they could drop into that period. The key into the next period of calving. The key really is to monitor those cows though and make sure that they're not calving just every 18 months, because they're not cost effective to keep on the farm if that's the case.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Do you think protein and energy buckets provide sufficient cow concentrates or not?
The problem with buckets is they're quite variable intake. So if some animals will take a lot of them and some animals won't take very much. How many buckets do you put out per number of cows? Make sure that there's enough access. And are they actually enough to meet requirement? So they need to, if it's being fed as a feed bucket, then they need to take quite a lot of it, and it's quite an expensive way of doing it. However, if forages are reasonable and there's plenty of forage available, to use them as a top-up can work in some situations.
Okay, thank you. There's somebody asking about where they can get more information on, they get their forage analysed, and where can they get more information. There is some information within the silage manual, and if you got any other advice of where they can get more information about what they've had analysed, Debbie?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's various sort of people you can talk. There are some vets will have some knowledge and interest. Feed reps, obviously, but then you just want to be conscious of that they're explaining it because they understand it, not because they want to sell you something. Or there are various consultants out there that probably would be happy to look at forage analysis and give some advice and work with farmers on that.
Okay. The next question, I'm 3 weeks off calving. What form of protein would you suggest if our silage tested 9% protein and 10.2 ME, which is pretty low?
You've two options. It depends how much of that silage they're eating. So if they're eating a reasonable amount of it, then you'll be amazed how easy it is actually, even with silage analysing at that level, to meet the requirement of the cow. The obvious answer would be to go with something like rape, but the other option would be to go with something like soya, which would be higher protein, you'd need less of it, and it's higher energy. There's always that discussion behind cost of soya, but it has the benefit of having some rumen protein and some bypass protein, so it helps production and colostrum, as well as feeding the bacteria in the rumen. So, but it is a little bit more expensive. However, this year it's probably, if you can buy it at a sensible price, it's probably not as expensive as some other protein sources. But really, it's making sure we get enough supplementation into those cows, whether it be something along the lines of rape or distillers or soya, and then a little bit of sort of wheat or barley to just drive a little bit of energy, just so you've got a good balance in there. But they'd be your key sort of sources that are available.
He has just said actually that rapeseed is nearby, so that rape meal, sorry. So that sounds like that could be the option for you, Ed.
Yeah, for a suckler cow, that would be an easy answer. Yeah.
Are pre-carver buckets good value for money? I know you said the intakes are variable, but are there some buckets that are better than others?
I don't know enough about individual buckets, so I wouldn't like to recommend or say one thing or another. I think the key is to have a good look at what you're actually looking for. If you're using them as a pre-carver from a mineral perspective, they would be the hard buckets that they don't take a lot of, but they're just getting a mineral supplementation from it. If it's a feed bucket you're looking for, then it really is a case of working out realistically how much energy you want them to get from it, and so how much that means that they need to take of it. So if a high energy bucket is somewhere around about 13 megajoules, you need to work out how much of that per kilo, then you need to work out how much of it they actually need to eat. And a lot of the time it does work out as a very expensive way of doing it.
Okay, the next question. We bolus the cows 8 weeks before calving and feed hay and straw diet, and 5 weeks before we introduce 2 kilograms of a 17% cow nut. Would you still give them some magnesium as well?
check the magnesium level in the cow nut. So if it's got magnesium in there as a pre-calving nut, then you're probably okay.
Okay, there's another one here about magnesium. Magnesium levels pre-calving, any preference method to ensure there's adequate levels?
No, not really. It's very farm dependent. So if it's a farm that's got particular issues, then it may be a case of having to supplement magnesium either orally by water or in feed or in compound or whatever other ways, or by bucket, high mag bucket if it's what you're using. If it's a farm that's not particularly much of an issue, then the higher magnesium in the cake or a dry cow mineral or something along those sort of lines might be enough. But it would depend a little bit on the cows and the forage and what the farm itself is actually having to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Cows and heifers have been outwintered on forage brassicas, but 2 to 8 weeks pre-calving, we are about to run out. Plan to switch to silage, hay, and silage, straw, and concentrates. Any thoughts about that diet change?
The ones that are 8 weeks out, that probably shouldn't be an issue at all. I would be slightly concerned about the ones only 2 weeks from calving, whether they'll adjust quick enough. I suppose the question I would have is, have they been having access to silage and beforehand? In which case, it will adjust easier than if they've just been on the brassicas and not had silage available.
Okay, so any diet changes you want to be doing slowly and adjusting them much slowly, I guess, is much better way of doing it.
And you need to allow sort of 3 to 4 weeks, really.
Okay, so this I think is the final question, unless anyone else has got any more. So if you've got any more questions, please type them in. Our cows are 6 to 8 weeks from calving on 9 kilograms of hay and 1 kilogram of straw. The hay is rapidly running out. Can we change to silage?
How long, Katie, sorry?
6 to 8 weeks from calving.
Yes, is the easy answer to that. Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Debbie. That's our final question for this evening. So thank you very much for a great presentation, and thank you for everybody's contribution regarding questions and discussion. I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and as I mentioned before, it has been recorded, so if there is anything that you need to recap, if you go to the AHDB YouTube channel, this one will be on there probably within the next week, and you will also be sent a link along with other webinars should you wish to go and recap on anything else that we've done. Hope everybody has a nice evening and can join us on the next webinar. Thank you.